This is the Modern Architect radio show and podcast. The Modern Architect features one-on-one interviews with renowned and cutting-edge architects, influencers, and sustainability leaders. Our show informs and illuminates the transformation that architecture brings to our cities, communities, and lives. And now, introducing the host of The Modern Architect, Tom Dioro.
Today, we're joined by Paul McClean, architect and principal at McClean Design. Paul was trained as an architect in Ireland and founded McClean Design in 2000. Over the last 15 years, McClean Design has grown into one of the leading contemporary residential design firms in the Los Angeles area committed to excellence in modern design. You can find them on the web at McCleanDesign.com. Again, that's McCleanDesign.com. Today's episode is made possible by Swatchbox, the leading sample platform for architects and designers. Swatchbox brings thousands of product samples from the world's leading manufacturers into one platform. Browse materials for inspiration, create custom collections, then request your samples for free with automatic next day or second day shipping. Get started at swatchbox.com. Hello, Paul. We're really honored and excited to have you on The Modern Architect today. Thank you for being here.
Gosh, thank you. Thank you so much, Tom. It's my pleasure and my honor to be here. Seriously.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that nice intro as well, Paul. Paul, we talked about, I'm going to ask you the quote that you had before the show that we talked about. I like that you have, not just for yourself, but your office. Share with us what, a quote that you have that means and matters much to you and your firm.
Well, there's a quote that Leonardo da Vinci did probably 500 years ago, which was, "Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication." And what that means to us is that always trying to look at things in a way to find a way to get to the essence of what we're trying to achieve, like not to overcomplicate things. And I think that's like a good mantra for a lot of things in life, not just architecture.
I like that. The essence of what you're trying to achieve. Explain a bit to your audience, what the essence means to you and why it really does matter.
Well, our houses, for me at least, we're trying to connect people to their environment. We're trying to connect them to nature. And the more we can get out of the way of that experience, the better that their enjoyment of the house will be. And I think often we live here in a beautiful environment most of the time, not the last couple of weeks, but most of the time. We're surrounded, we're very lucky in Southern California to be surrounded by a lot of nature, and we have a very kind of varied topography, and people have the opportunity to be exposed to that. But also, even if you live in a more conventional suburban setting, we've got great sunshine, great vegetation, and I think most of the reason we all live here is because of the weather. So we try and design our houses in a way with two kind of things. One is to connect to nature, and the other is not to forget that we're not setting out to do like an architectural statement. We're setting out to do a house that will function really well for the occupants, the family that lives there. And in some ways, it should be, it is the background to their life. It is not their life. If the house is becoming their life, it's kind of overstayed its welcome, I guess. It's not supposed to be part of the family. It's supposed to be where the family lives, and it should be improving their life and making them feel more comfortable and giving them a sense of peace and serenity when they need it, and allowing them to live, wonderful lives, I guess.
I like that, allow peace and serenity. If you can describe your clientele without naming names, unless you'd like to, what would you say is a really common thing amongst your clientele?
Well, I think one of the great things about what we do, for us especially, is that people don't design houses when they're in a difficult part of their life. Generally, it's usually they obviously have been successful, because undertaking a custom home is an expensive thing. But they're usually in a point where they feel that they're looking forward to the future. I mean, you have to be an optimist, right, to be an architect, because you're kind of thinking about what the future is going to be like, and you're hoping your buildings will be there for it. So they tend to be self-starters, and we don't really have, nearly all our clients have an interesting story and about how they got to where they are in life. It's fascinating. I mean, everything from at one end of the spectrum, movie stars, and at the other end of the spectrum, like business people. But we've had clients over the years that, make their living in ways you never really imagine. We all have such preconceived notions of how people become wealthy enough to build a home. But like one example I remember from a few years back was a client who, had started collecting baseball cards in the playground when he was 5. I can still see him, what he'd be like when he was 5 in the playground. And he grew that into a business, where he traded sports memorabilia very successfully.
Wow. There's obviously must be a love of nature for you to do the homes that you've done, because they're spectacular. I've seen them obviously on your website. They're spectacular, but there's also an air of warmth with it. It's not very stale. It's not stale at all. It's very warm, and it has a timelessness to it. Is that by design?
That's really, thank you very much. That's the best compliment we could get. That's our goal. We want to build houses that will stand the test of time. I think that it's been gratifying to see over the last few years, like as you said, our business is 22 years old. So some of those houses are older now and cycling through getting remodeled and so on. And it's great to see that, at least in my opinion, like the spaces are holding up really well. So we're seeing people change materiality, but the spaces are staying. And I think that's what it's about, the light and the space that these homes create. But I also think that, we don't, like we said, we want the houses to be practical too. And maybe people don't, think of that word when they look at our homes, but we do put a lot of time into thinking about how people are going to use the homes, and we want them to be warm and inviting, and not to be the type of place where if somebody kicks off their shoes, the whole decor seems ruined, right? It's got to be robust in its ability to handle, life and kids and dogs and who knows, some pet pigs we've had in the past, So wow. We want to design those type of houses, and so we spend a lot of time also with our clients just trying to figure out how they want to live. And I always find that really fascinating, because I think if you just leave people alone and you just say, hey, what do you want in your house? They're going to describe what they have in their house right now, and maybe a couple of things they don't like and a couple of things they wish they had. But what we try and do is try and get deeper down into that and figure out like what would be the best way for them to live. For example, if someone is really big into entertaining, we kind of have to figure out, is it formal entertaining? Is it casual entertaining? Like, do they want a table with 20 people to sit down? That's to put 20 people in a formal dining room, it's a big space, So like trying to think about that. Do they imagine they're going to live there for the rest of their lives? Do we want to think about, as one of our clients calls it, thriving in place, making the house work so that even if down the road you're a little bit more incapacitated or don't have the abilities you currently have, that the house is still going to function for you and you're going to be able to enjoy it.
How much is, would you say, your clientele has a real design sensibility before they even reach out to you, or they reach out to you?
That's a great question. It's all over the map. Obviously, what we're very fortunate in is that at this stage, people come to us because they like what we do. So we're not having to have those type of discussions like, do you want, a Mediterranean house? Do you want a French Tudor house? They're coming because they like what we've done before. And usually there's something they've seen and they gravitated to that. And then, sometimes they'll come in and say, I just want exactly that again. And then we'll explain to them, obviously, that their site is different. And as even if we start with the idea it's going to be very similar to the house, it never ends up like that. It changes. But it runs the gamut from people who have very little interest in design to people who are intensely involved in every decision. And I would say, the medium to intensely involved is the better clients in a way, because I think they're all great clients, but at the same time, that active engagement helps to make the house more their own. you know. And like, I have a client I finished a house for in West Hollywood, and he's kind enough to let us show the house to people. And every time we bring someone up there, he likes to do the tour, and he will take everyone around the house, and he'll make the same joke at the end every time, which is like, what did you do in this process, Paul? Because I feel like I designed all of this, and I'm like, I just drafted it for you. Don't worry, So, but that's where that feels like a true collaboration and something. There's ownership there, and not just the actual ownership, but like pride of design ownership coming from the client as well. And then you've had a successful project, and also by doing that, that makes the projects different. I mean, we really want every project to be different from the last. And the more involved the client is, the more we kind of respond to that and change to accommodate their wishes.
Okay. Now, this question might be a little favorable left turn here, but my firm belief is that architects and even the builders ought to have a placard or an acknowledgement somewhere in the house that they had designed the home or even built the home. Not too dissimilar to a book having an author's name. What's your thought on that? And I don't know if you do or not.
We don't right now, and it's funny. It's a really great point. I mean, I've thought about it, and then sometimes I think, is it a little arrogant, to put a stamp on the building, it says McClean Design 2022. But yeah. I guess, it's a nice idea. Maybe if the houses last long enough, maybe people will have forgotten who did them, and then maybe that will be nice. I don't think I'll be around to know about it myself, but I do hope that I think our business, has obviously been reasonably successful, and I hope it will keep going without me at some point, and that the other people who are here in the office who are immensely talented and do most of the work will get to kind of take that somewhere else at some point. So kind of going the same direction, I guess. To your question, slightly different, but yeah, where does that lead? It's a great idea, I think. But I think also, in a way, architects we've got the cool end of the job, in the sense that everyone seems to remember who the architect was for a project. But I feel like that's a very valid point, that no one really gives enough credit to the rest of the team. Without the amazing contractors and all the creative consultants and all the subcontractors with all their brilliant ideas, and the fact that they put up with us all is amazing in the first place. None of these houses would be here, and it's a shame that they don't really get much of the credit for it.
Wow. Well, great that you answered that very well. This is The Modern Architect, KCSU Stanford 90.1 FM. We're talking today with Paul McClean, architect and principal at McClean Design in Los Angeles, California. For more information, feel free to visit their website at McCleanDesign.com. Again, that's McCleanDesign.com. Paul, if you're at liberty to share, what recent project or projects have you worked on or currently? You don't have to name names, but
we have some great projects right now. We're very fortunate in what we get to do and the type of projects that we have, that they have decent budgets, and everyone has a budget. I should say that, by the way. It doesn't matter if they're the world's richest person or not. They still have a budget, and it's about, I think part of that is about having the feeling or the sense that you're getting value for money, that it's not just people taking advantage of you. But we are really lucky right now in that we're not just working in California, and we do love working in California. That's where we're from. But we've seen over the last 20 years, like, we started out in coastal Orange County and kind of grew up into the LA area, and then out further into the state. And now we've got projects not only in California, but in like several states, like Nevada, Colorado, Florida, Texas. We've also got projects in the Turks and Caicos, in Hawaii, and Thailand, which is really interesting and fascinating. So, and we're discussing new projects in India and China. So it's amazing how the world has changed in the last 10 years for like what's a small architecture firm, that you can kind of have a little bit of a global presence, which is not something that I could have even imagined 20 years ago. I don't know if any of us could have imagined that 20 years ago. But what's most enjoyable about that is that the idea of, obviously these people come and they want to do homes like they've seen of ours in California, and then how do we take those ideas that we've developed here, which come out of a long history of modern architecture, modern residential architecture in California. There is just no better place on the planet for modern residential architecture. There's been so much experimentation in the last 100 years, and then how do we take those ideas and make them work in different climates and in different locations and in different cultures, you know, and how that's the fascinating part, you know, just you get into a different culture and there are all these little subtle things that you have to think about that are a little bit different than what we do. For example, I forgot to mention we've got some projects in Dubai as well, and so sometimes we're dealing there with the fact that people entertain in completely different ways. Men and women just don't seem to entertain together. So you're setting up a house in a way where everyone could feel comfortable. And also, for example, there might be a need for a prayer room, you know, just things that you don't think about when you're designing a house in California. So I love that aspect of it.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. What's changed in the last couple of years, let's say 2 or 3 years, for you, and how have things evolved architecturally in your experience?
Gosh, well, it kind of leading back to the last question, in the last, you know, few years, that development of projects in different places around the world, that's been the biggest change for us. Dealing with obviously the pandemic and the implications of that, I think it's interesting that, you know, one of the positive things coming out of the pandemic has been that, you know, the idea that work is maybe a little bit more fluid than sitting just in the office altogether, and that we are able to do things with Zoom calls and online meetings that, you know, people are fully accepting of that now, versus maybe 5 years ago it was seen as a strange thing. And now we find ourselves on Zoom calls with people down the street, you know, versus not necessarily people in Thailand, right? And but on the other hand, I really brought home to me during the pandemic that the camaraderie and the design collaboration that goes on in an architectural office was lost somewhat in that process. And there is that also that kind of positive atmosphere, you know, where a lot of times when you're in the office, you know, someone's having an idea and you sit together and you kind of work through that idea, and it's a very positive experience for everybody. And, you know, kind of people finish each other's sentences and finish each other's drawings. And with the negative of all that with the pandemic and Zoom was that process just seemed to be much more difficult to achieve. And, you know, it's just not the same as being in the same room. So even though, you know, we can do so much remotely now, we often find we still have to go places. And when we go places, we make a lot more progress, you know, so that's interesting.
I like that you said we make more progress. What's your thought on, oftentimes I am, email is obviously a standard form of communication, but I believe oftentimes even a phone conversation can expedite and make something more effective. What's your
Isn't
thought
that
on
so
that?
true? I mean, how many times have you seen an email chain with 15 participants on it that goes on for 5 days trying to figure out a time for a meeting, when if someone had just picked up the phone, you know, we could have had the
Very
meeting
true.
there and then. But yeah,
Yes.
and at various levels, that is an issue. And I noticed that I think the big thing is that and for architecture is a collaborative endeavor. There is no, I mean, much as people might think it, you know, there's not this one person sitting here making all these decisions. I think that, you know, from our perspective as the architects, we try very hard to help guide this process on its design journey, keeping the vision of what we're trying to achieve. But the ideas and the way to make that happen come from like hundreds of people. And so it's the ultimate form of collaboration to design a building. And for anyone to say that, oh, you know, Frank Gehry designed that building, not picking on Frank, but you know
Sure.
what I mean? It's like Frank Gehry was very much like this, maybe the signature behind that building, but like 1,000 people got involved and made that vision come to life. And,
True.
and I'm sure Frank could be the very first person to tell you that, So I think that's where we forget that the collaboration and the human interaction is what brings out the best in us.
Along the lines of that acknowledgement and recognition, another, I'm biased, of course, but another factor in your favor, in architects' favor, is that even with public relations, or you look at media, newsprint, you'll see, new hotel built, it's finished, or it's going to be built, and there won't be a mention of the architect in there. And I see that very, very often. Actually, that was one of the inspirations to begin the show at Stanford. The Modern Architect was that just did not get the recognition, and I knew that these buildings just did not pop up out of the ground, but there wasn't an acknowledgement of the architect, or if there was, it was nominal at best. What's your thought on that? If you're at liberty to cite your opinion, which is, would love to hear it.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think I read once Norman Foster said that one of the great things about being an architect, or maybe it was Frank Gehry, said that, you can kind of be a celebrity without having to be a celebrity.
Oh,
So
okay.
that, I mean, I think that within the architectural community, there's definitely a lot of acknowledgement of who built buildings
Sure.
and so on. And I think, you can go, if you go to an architectural university or to a college, you'll have a lot of students there who'll be very excited maybe to meet you if they're familiar with your work. But I think that that's okay. I mean, the buildings are what we're trying to achieve in the end, I think. I mean, it's a very interesting time right now in society. I mean, with the advent of social media. I'm hoping by the time, my grandchildren, if I'm lucky to have any, are grown up, that they might have figured out how to use social media. I don't think
Yeah.
I think we're all like it's just not working very well in general, but I think there's such an emphasis on celebrity and instant gratification and all those things that maybe it's not bad that some things in life are, kind of just about the work itself and not about the people behind the work.
Very true. I'll go back to what you had said at the beginning, Paul, is the essence. That essence, there's a lot of heart, and I'll use the word grit, that's involved in great design, and a lot of thought that went behind it. What's your take, and what's your thought on that level of grit and heart that a lot of people don't see, and then how it's expressed in the building, in the home itself?
I think that's an excellent question, Tom, because there is the idea out there that there's let's call it just this building signature, that like people look and go, oh wow, it's a pyramid, it's a circle, whatever it is. There's some architects, especially today, who seem to thrive on that, in the media and the internet world. But I feel like the initial concept is just exactly that, an initial concept. And if a building is to be successful, it needs depth. And the depth comes from that constant refining and eliminating extraneous things and working out details to make them come together right and solving problems. And, we'll often, if our typical house takes about 3 years to build, I mean, the design part of what everyone thinks of design is probably the first 3 months of the first year before the 3 year starts. But the house isn't really done for 4 years, and the other 3 and 3/4 years are all about trying to figure that out and make it happen and work with everyone around you to make it as best as it can be.
Wow, well answered. You're listening to the Modern Architect podcast. We're talking today with Paul McClean, principal at McClean Design. For more information, feel free to visit their website at McCleanDesign.com. Again, that's McCleanDesign.com. Paul, with the architecture and construction business constantly evolving, the expectations evolve kind of as well. What's I know I've answered this a little bit earlier, but what's changed in your experience over the last, say, 2 or 3 years regarding that?
Well, in different ways. In design, I think definitely people are much more critical in a positive way. Maybe critical is the wrong word. I find clients are diving much deeper into the design with us, which I think is enormously beneficial for everybody. And I think that's because of the pandemic and people having to reevaluate where they are and how they live. So that's been a huge difference we've noticed from a psychological perspective, from a kind of wants and desires perspective. Definitely an emphasis on outdoor space, an emphasis on wellness, emphasis on exercise, home gyms, home spas, office space. And it's interesting because before the pandemic, people might say, oh yeah, I want an office space at my house because I might work from home once in a while, which really probably meant they wanted to do their bills on a Monday morning or something. And now it's like, well, where am I going to put this office? How is it going to interact with the rest of the house? And if people come to the house, how are they going to arrive? What are they going to see? So we're getting that much deeper level of involvement in the discussion because now it's become something they're much more aware of. So I think that is all a positive development. I think also, though, we're finding that it's getting just increasingly difficult and more complicated to get things done. And I think people all over the world are probably complaining about that right now, not just me. It seems like everything is much more difficult to get to the end than it used to be. And I think some of it is just lack of staff, shortages of staff in different areas, maybe in the planning department, so now plans are taking, 6 to 9 months to get corrections back versus 3, or just the endless Zoom calls, which, everyone now seems to think they need 3 calls a day. And mostly we're talking, we're not drawing, So we're struggling, as I'm sure most offices are, to try and get that back into balance. So we're getting enough time actually producing as opposed to talking.
That's terrific. Great description. Paul, is there anything that you'd like to share that we have not touched on in your show this morning?
Oh gosh. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a privilege. And it's a privilege to be able to do this for a living. And I never forget that. And I never would have thought, I grew up in Ireland and pretty modest background. And I just never imagined that these opportunities would come. And it's just wonderful to be able to do it. And also just to be able to meet all these people. And I sometimes think, from an architect's perspective, some architects I think if you're going to do homes, you have to be a certain type of personality. You have to be interested in people, because it's about people. And I remember we had young man come into the office a while ago for an interview, and it didn't work out for him. But really, it didn't work out because he said, well, I don't like the idea of clients like having opinions on my design ideas. And if they don't like it, they should, I don't want to change it. And I was like, wow, well then you're not in the right end of the business, So because the main thing you need to do is listen. Listening is the most important thing. And but we're lucky that we meet such fascinating people, and their enthusiasm for what we're doing and is just constantly fantastic. And we have the pleasure now of seeing, multiple homes for the same clients. And we have a project in coastal California where we're designing a house which will be for the kids who grew up in one of our earlier houses. And that's just like, amazing that we can do that, that with such an influence that they actually didn't want to go live in a Mediterranean house. They wanted one just like mom and dad's, So.
I love it. Paul, it's been a real honor and pleasure having you on as our guest today. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Tom. Thank you so much. It's been great.
Thank you very much. And if you be so kind to consider coming on again, I'd love to invite you.
I would love to. Thank you again.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. You've been listening to the Modern Architect Podcast. I'm Tom Dioro. Our guest today has been Paul McClean, architect and principal at McClean Design. Paul was trained as an architect in Ireland and founded McClean Design in the year 2000. Over the last 15 years, McClean Design has grown into one of the leading contemporary residential design firms in the Los Angeles area and around the world now, committed to excellence in modern design. For more information, feel free to visit their website at McCleanDesign.com. Again, that's McCleanDesign.com. Join us again next time when we welcome another outstanding architect, engineer, influencer, or civic leader committed to positive, sustainable, and beautiful cities, communities, and lives. Thank you. Today's episode is made possible by Swatchbox, the leading sample platform for architects and designers. Swatchbox brings thousands of product samples from the world's leading manufacturers into one platform. Browse materials for inspiration, create custom collections, then request your samples for free with automatic next day or second day shipping. Get started at swatchbox.com.